April 1208, Septian calendar. Aramis High School, an extremely prestigious school in Calvard's capital. Named for the great artist Aramis, who had been pivotal in the Calvardian Revolution 100 years ago. Its founding goal was to nurture the great young minds who would one day lead the new nation into the future. The school is founded on and greatly values traditional Calvardian culture, but likewise values the consideration of different beliefs and ways of life. Aramis is a free-spirited school, one which respects the independence of its students and thus attracts applicants from all across Zamuria. Many call it a shining example of Calvard's ideals, crystallized in the form of one historical academic institution. Each spring, the much-anticipated Aramis Liberal Arts Festival is held to welcome new students. Shortly after, on a certain day in 1208, still draped in the morning moonlight, a great crowd of students scurried around the picturesque school courtyard. Yet, even among all those bright youths, one stood out. A young woman with a ribbon tied up with her long violet hair. Now, 17 years old, she'd grown to have a very beautiful feminine physique. Despite her womanly charms, she maintained a cute, youthful face. A fascinating combination that drew all eyes towards her. Oh! Ren Bright, an exchange student from Liberal's esteemed Janus Royal Academy. Enrolling for the spring semester, she attends Aramis High School as a second-year student. Noted as a prodigy from her youth, even holding numerous degrees and PhDs, it was obvious that she wasn't in attendance merely to attain a high school level education. In truth, she simply wanted a cover that would allow her to freely explore the Republic, and perhaps to also engage in some secret training. During her time at Janus Royal Academy, she had already ascertained that the front of a student was perfect for such a task. They naturally face some restrictions, but, on the whole, the world is rather kind to students. Thus, with this goal in mind, Renne had resolved to stand out as little as possible in her time as a student of Aramis. She held that she couldn't act graceful yet humble. And yet... A fine morning, Miss Bright. Yeah, it's Ren Bright in the flesh. Take a look over there. That girl's really... She's so hot, and not to mention insanely smart. Each student that she passed had a greeting to give or something to say. She was looked up with both envy and admiration alike. She was stunning, of course, but she became even more of a celebrity after a teacher leaked that she managed perfect scores on her entrance exam. All this fame merely 1 month after coming to Aramis. Regardless of what was actually meant by it, Ren took all of these comments as a shower of praise, though of course, many were not so well intentioned. Not only was she an exchange student, but she was one who attained such popularity in less than a month. Naturally, there would be a number of students who would look upon with her jealousy and distaste. Even on this fine April morning, there were those who stayed away from her, watching from the shadows as she exchanged greetings with other students, spewing complaints and slander about the young woman, Ren had no clubs or other activities to be going to. Thus, after the day's classes had all ended, she took her time tidying up her bag and rising from her seat. Ah, Ren Bright, would you mind if we chatted for a bit? There, alongside his entourage of lackeys, a young man called out to Ren. Man, I'm totally gonna simp for older Ren. I'm not particularly busy. What would you like to discuss, Griffith? As she'd grown outwardly, Ren chose to likewise demonstrate that her heart had become that of a young woman by taking extra care to not only refer to herself in the first person. Of course, this was also part of her graceful yet humble manner. I was wondering if you'd care to have dinner with me. In order to strengthen our friendship, of course, I'd already reserved us a table at a fine restaurant. This young man was Roland Griffith, and he adorned himself with a polite and gentlemanly smile as he extended the invitation to Ren. There were many boys at the school who desired nothing more than a date with Ren, yet each time she would refuse, coming up with an excuse in order to be polite. This time was no exception. I'm terribly sorry, Griffith, but I've already made plans for tonight. Perhaps we can meet to chat over some time at tea at a later date. Normally, the boy would understand and give up at this point. However, it seemed this time was an exception. Yes, that's fine, but I see that you're not in a rush. Surely there's an important matter I would like to discuss with you. How about if we go right now? Renne would have been lying if she said she wasn't a bit intrigued by Ronald's suspicious smile. An important matter? It's a shame, but I really do have prior obligations tonight. I can't go out for dinner. Though, I do have a little bit of time right now. Could we talk about it here? I see. That really is a shame. Though his words carried only disappointment, frustration was written all over Ronald's face. It was clear that he hadn't planned for things to go like this. Though, in an instant, he once hid his frustration, returning to his polite smile and continuing. Oh, that's fine. It seems that everyone who this doesn't involve has already left. He looked around as he said this. Indeed, the only people who remained in the classroom were Ren, Ronald, and his entourage. All the other students were already heading home or hurrying to their clubs. Perhaps they left either earlier than usual, not wanting to get involved with whatever Roland is scheming. Ronald took one more step towards Ren before speaking once more. Bright, you're an exchange student all the way from Liberal. From what I've heard, you coming to Calvert has nothing to do with your family's circumstances or moving or anything else of the sort. You've come purely to study at Aramis. Truly, I admire your craving for knowledge, that true intellectual spirit. His tone became a bit dramatic. Ronald continued. However, I'm worried for your well-being, sweet Bright. Surely, living all alone in a foreign country is a frightening experience. You've no one to rely on, yet surely you'll have to go through all sorts of hardships all on your own. Therefore, I'd begun to think, perhaps you need a benefactor, a guardian even. Hearing Ronald's daring proclamation, Ren narrowed her eyes. I see, so you wish to invite me into your little clique? Ronald beamed. His father was a member of the Republican Congress, thus Ronald himself also held some influence. Using that influence, Ronald had built up a small faction of his own, and had now become the primary candidate for the student council election that was to be held in a few weeks. Surely if he could bring Ren, the most popular girl in school, into his faction, then his victory would be all but assured. Trust me, Bright, this is a prime opportunity for you as well. Come under my wing and the rest of your school life will be a breeze. Given that you're an exchange student, your position at the school will differ greatly depending on whether or not you have some protection. Ren couldn't help but think that it really was a prime opportunity. If she entered a well-positioned group, gathering information from within the school would become a much easier task. Not to mention that Ronald's father was a congressman. If she could make such a connection, she'd have a much easier time operating in general. Ronald, without even knowing Ren's true motives, had granted her an almost perfectly appealing offer. Ren returned Ronald's polite smile and said in a light voice, My apologies, but I have no interest in such an offer. She refused bluntly. Ronald's eyebrows twitched along with his smile. His entourage also seemed upset. Clearly, this wasn't the answer they'd anticipated. Just a moment, Bright. Think about it. Surely someone as smart as you should realize just how meritorious such an offer is. Are you really okay with just letting it slip away? You'll surely come to regret it. Ronald's tone became much harsher. His entourage, which had merely been standing back calmly up to now, slowly came forward to intimidate Ren. Yet, even in the face of this, Ren remained as calm as ever. It's certainly an appealing offer. In fact, I'd even be happy to help someone win the election. But, well, that'd be on the sole condition that the one I'm helping isn't you. What the hell did you just say? Suddenly provoked, Ronald's voice was filled with rage, yet Ren deflected his anger with her calm expression. Come now, don't you want to know my reasoning, Griffith? I know just who it was that was saying all that filth about me this morning. It was you and your lackeys, all behind my back. Oh, but don't think I've only just noticed today. You and your little friends have always been regurgitating such drivel, ever since before the Liberal Arts Festival. Arnold and his group were all flustered by this accusation. Ren took their failure to respond as their silent recognition of the truth and continued speaking. Perhaps what you're trying here isn't wrong. I know that I've been standing out a bit too much recently and have aimed to avoid that myself. I think it's a brilliant strategy to try and turn the biggest threat to your faction into your ally. But such a strategy will never work if that threat notices your hostility towards them. Therefore, if I were to team up with such unskilled people who'd make such an elementary mistake, I'm sure I'd grow bored. Ren simply gave a sigh and shrug, but Ronald was quivering with anger. Well then everyone, I hope you'll have a good evening. While Ronald continues to frantically think of a retort, Ren simply ignored him and his friends, gracefully exiting the classroom past them. Damn. Savage. But Mom, But Mom won't stop using Egg to test everything she can think of. He was completely exhausted this time. We got a ton of great data thanks to his sacrifice, but still. I'm glad to hear that Auntie Erica's as energetic as ever. That night, Ren was alone in her dorm room. Yet, she was entirely wrapped up in a remote conversation with Tita. Ah! Older Tita! Still though, that's as far as your stories with them ever go. I'd love if you two would start acting a bit more like a proper hopeless couple, like my dear brother and sister. Well, we're still, But next week he promised to go out with me. My, I'm happy to hear that. I'm looking forward to you becoming a proper adult. But Ren, could you not? Oh god. While Ren had begun studying abroad in Calvard, Tita had just graduated from Thor's and was returning to Liberal. The two friends were in unfortunately different positions. Both feeling lonely without each other, they decided to chat like this at least once a week. It had become a fun event to look forward to for the both of them, where they could talk about their new lives in different places and the fruits of their own research and investigations. And about that trouble between the Epstein Foundation and Vern, it seems that they may have a lawsuit on their hands? Ugh. I really hope things don't come to that. Both friends, though separated by many args, furrowed their brows in unison. Recently, the two had no shortage of troubles thanks to Calvard's very own Vern Company. Last year, after the situation around Crossbow's reindependence calmed down and the dust had settled, Professor Erica, as a representative of ZCF, had invited the Vern Company to join the new West Zemoria Technology Federation. However, their response was, as Erica had somewhat anticipated, a refusal. Just when Erica and the other members of the Technological Union began making preparations to win Vern over, an incident occurred that tore any chances of unity to shreds. The Vern Company announced its independent development of the next generation combat orbits, meaning that while up until they had been co-developing it in conjunction with the Epstein Foundation, Vern removed the Epstein Foundation from the system and began developing on their own. Okay. Ever since the Orbital Revolution, Epstein had lended its expertise to any country that had wished it. The Epstein Foundation had been foundational to the development of all combat orbits, being considered the leading organization of the technology up until this point. For example, before the Great War, they had worked alongside the Ranford Group to develop the Arcus and Arcus II, never being separated from their project. It's for that reason that such an unprecedented announcement rocked the entire technological world. Naturally, the Epstein Foundation, which had been completely removed from the project without their consent, was greatly displeased. It was a situation that deeply concerned their rights as a company, as well threatened their long-standing position as the hegemon of the industry. After a number of fruitless attempts at negotiating, it seemed that things would be coming to a head in a large-scale international lawsuit. However, looking at where things stand now, I honestly think Vern has the upper hand going into the trial. It had been announced that this new 6th generation combat orbit would be vastly different from the existing Ramdet units, thus constituting a new technological standard. Sounds like every facet of the orbit will incorporate some sort of unique feature or new technology. It's even rumored to have some features that won't be known to the public. I'm really interested in those, but what are they thinking, proceeding into such territory without the Foundation? I guess Vern is pouring all the resources into arms development at the behest of the Republic's government, but still. Yes, it's likely that they're planning some sort of large-scale company overhaul. On the surface, they're claiming that they're actually scaling back their military, but there's no doubt that it's merely cover to replace existing resources with much stronger ones. Following the Great War, the Empire was forced to, as per the terms of the peace treaty, reduce their military to around the size of the Republic's. However, given those circumstances, if the Republic were to hypothetically undergo a large-scale weapons upgrade, the balance of power would be tilted once more. There are quite a few interesting pieces moving in the shadows. I'd rather like to go to Vern's home city and ascertain the situation with my own eyes. There's still no information coming out about Professor Hamilton, I assume? Yeah, it sounds like he's still working on his research in Eastern Zemoria, but Each time Grandpa and Mom try to contact him, they get nothing in response. Well, communications networks likely still haven't been established where he is. Nothing we can do about that. Though if he's anywhere near as smart as the rest of the 3 disciples, it'd be rather relieving to get his help. That sure would. Lately we've been hearing some pretty disturbing rumors coming out about these private military companies. I wonder if things would still be turning out like this had Hamilton remained as an advisor to the Verne Company. The topic had slowly started to bring down Tita's spirits. In the past year, Western Reverie had once more experienced the stability it hadn't felt in some time, finally enjoying peace and prosperity. However, one couldn't shake the feeling that this peace had been built on a foundation of thin ice. A great number of concerns had begun to arise, especially in the rapidly evolving field of technology. No matter how much we brood over this, nothing will change. For now, we just need to do all we can from our present positions. That's why I'm here in the Republic, and that's why you're giving it your all over there. Right. Now we have a mountain of problems to sort through, but I don't think there's any reason to be overly pessimistic. Am I wrong? Ren, no, you're right. Thanks. They continued to chat late into the night, to the point where neither even noticed until it had already passed midnight. It's already this late, I guess I should get going. See you later, Ren. Yeah, have a good night, Tita. Yep, have a good night. At that moment, it seems that Tita had suddenly remembered something, and thus called out to Ren before she could end their communications. Oh yeah, before we meet up, Big Sis told me to ask you whether you were doing well in school or not. I'm sure to contact Estelle and the others regularly, yet they're still this worried about me. For but a moment, Ren remembered her encounter with Roland after class, but decided it was a minor incident and waved it aside. I'm doing splendidly. There's nothing to be worried about. Got it. She also told me to tell you, if you're ever getting bullied at school, let us know and we'll rush right over. Not Estelle. She's still so overprotective. She should know there's no need. No, it's not that. I think she said something like, I'd be worried for the life of the bully. Her face adorned with shock, and was at a loss for words. Tita couldn't help but laugh seeing her friend making such a face. That really is the sort of thing she should be worried about. That's rather rude, don't you think? Even if something like that were to happen, I wouldn't do anything too terrible. I'm not quite the same as I was as a child. Back then, you probably would have. I'm a young lady now, Tita. It's better to handle more situations with dignity and forgiveness. Additionally, I'm aiming to lay as low as possible while at the school. I don't really know how possible it is for you to lie low, Ren. Anyways, I guess we should really be going now. Oh yeah, but if you happen to run across Zin, tell him we all miss him. Yes, I plan to pay him a visit once things have calmed down on my end. He's done so much for us, I'd quite like to see him once more. I think everybody would like to see Zin again. Reappearance of Zin finally. Once more they'd fall into a long conversation, although unintentionally. Finally, sometime after the day had already switched, they finally hung up and ended their little girls' chat. The following day, in Aramis High School's main schoolhouse. During lunch break, Ren decided to leave the classroom and begin down the stairs. However, she suddenly felt something close behind her and instinctively moved aside. It was a fellow student, a girl, who came into view. She had across her face the same shocked and fearful expression that one wears when they feel themselves lose their balance and their feet begin to slip. She passed right where Ren had been, but her momentum continued to drag her down. If no one stopped her, she'd end up falling down the stairs. Ren immediately reached out and grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her towards her. The girl, who had just been tumbling, came to a stop, supported by Ren's hand, which was outstretched in a position not unlike that of a ballroom dancer's. A handful of nearby students saw these events unfolding and couldn't help but let out a sigh of admiration. Seeing the girl was still out of it, Ren called to her gently. Is everything alright? Are you uninjured? Suddenly realizing what had happened, the girl quickly stood upright and responded to Ren's display of sympathy, her face growing the slightest bit red. Yes, it seems I'm unscathed. You're Bright from the next class over, yes? You really saved me there. I can't thank you enough. It was nothing at all. That said, I get the feeling you're in a hurry at the top of the stairs. Is something the matter? The girl kneaded her eyebrows and thought at the question. No, I wasn't really. No, that's not it. It's just... It suddenly felt like someone had pushed me from behind. No, I'm overthinking things. We probably just bumped into each other as we passed by. Thanking Ren once more, the girl departed. However, Ren couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Just a coincidence, huh? No, if I hadn't made it in time, she would have fallen down the stairs and been seriously injured. Though, perhaps it's possible that I was their target from the beginning? That's the case. It was hard to say that she had a solid ground for her suspicions, but she could certainly feel something was amiss at that time. She'd grown used to the feeling of having a malicious gaze directed at her from afar. It would take a much shorter time than she'd anticipated for her baseless conjecture to become the certain truth. The following day, Ren returned to the classroom from physical education with her classmates. However, as she began to prepare for her next class, she noticed something strange. It was, for a student, a rather dire situation. Glue had been smothered over the sides of all of her textbooks. Obviously, such an impairment made the books unable to be opened properly. This was a clear demonstration of an intentional harassment. And on top of that, it was clear who the responsible party was. She could hear Ronald Griffith, who she'd rejected just 2 days prior, standing and grinning with his entourage not far away. They all laughed at her as they watched her misfortune unfold. He's not even making an attempt to hide it. No, it's not even that. He wants me to know, as a way to intimidate me. Of course, it was now certain that the previous day's incident at the stairway had been their doing as well. Their motives, likewise, were easy to understand. So long as Ren refused to join his faction, she, being such a standout student, was a threat to his election campaign. In order to secure his odds of victory, he'd attempted to embarrass her until she yielded to his demands. It didn't matter to him that Ren had no intention of even running in the election. Having taken a moment to examine the textbook, Ren took on a slightly doubtful expression. I should be able to fix these up with ease, but that will take some time. And so the bell rang and class began. Throughout class, Ren left the textbook on her desk but didn't make any further attempts to open it. Seeing as much, the teacher was displeased. She called on her to speak so as to make an example of her. Miss Bright, please read in the next paragraph. Ronald and his friend thought of the derisive chuckle. Surely they were imagining the coming scene of the teacher harshly scolding her. However, reality didn't play out quite as they'd hoped. Without the slightest amount of panic in her expression, Ren began reading aloud, line for line, word for word, just as it was written in the textbook. Yet her textbook remained closed, and there was no way she was looking at another student's. Miss Bright, have you memorized the entire text? Even the homeroom teacher was shocked. Yes, I've been preparing the text well in advance. Isn't such diligence natural for a student of Aramis? Both the teacher and the other students couldn't help but gasp in both surprise and admiration at Ren's perfect response. Ronald and his cohorts, on the other hand, ground their teeth bitterly at this development. On the next day, as Ren was en route to school, as Ren passed through the front gate and was about to enter the school building with a crowd of students, she noticed a pungent odor drifting from above and looked up to find the source. Just as she did, part of the railings around the school building roof broke off and began to fall down, right on top of her. Seeing this, the surrounding students all began to scream in terror. I can avoid it with ease, but the piece of railing that was crashing down at them was more than 2 arcs long. It would certainly end up injuring a number of the surrounding students. Assessing the situation, Ren reached for the combat orbit she'd kept hidden in her school bag. Airstrike. With a short recitation of the art's name, a sphere of wind appeared before Ren and it went flying upward. Ren had toned down the strength of the orbital art, so it was just enough to offset the railing's momentum without sending it flying. With a small hop, she was able to catch it with ease. Stench. This really wasn't some random accident. It was the unmistakable smell of a plant-like monster's bodily fluids. Their fluids are capable of corroding metal as if the damage were natural, and thus could even be used as a dissolving agent in some situations. In other words, this was an intentional attack disguised as a natural occurrence. Given that Ren was the target, the culprit's objective was obvious. That same malicious glare targeting Ren from the shadows likewise served to prove this theory. However, that glare wasn't the only attention she was receiving. Whoa! That was amazing! Did you just see that? Bright, how talented are you? While Ren was busy being lost in thought, a swell of cheers formed around her. Just like an artist having completed her performance, Ren gave an elegant curtsy to her spectators. The harassment didn't stop there. However, Ren continued to evade each onslaught with grace, garnering more and more tension with each incident. The state of affairs carried on for several days, until one day, Ronald, fed up with how things were going, finally called Ren to behind the schoolhouse. He and his entourage all present, he wore a frustrated expression, completely different from the polite and composed demeanor he had expressed a few days prior. Ren's smug ass face. Let me give it to you straight, Ren Bright. You're in my way. He had no will to uphold any pretenses, his normal gentlemanly demeanor having completely vanished. My, it's rather quite regrettable to hear that from my own classmate. Don't play dumb with me. I've poured so much time and merit into building up my influence in this school. And yet, you think you can just stroll in here and show me up? Now, of all times? It's painfully obvious you're trying to get in my way of my ambitions. Ren kept her cool in the face of Ronald's obnoxious fury. I suppose you have only yourself to blame for that. It was only because Ronald had tried to cause her so much grief that Ren ended up standing out so much. With this fact pointed out to him, Ronald clicked his tongue in regret. That's besides the point. I won't tolerate your presence any longer. I'd like you to exit the stage for a while. And what is that supposed to mean? As if he'd finally regained the upper hand, Ronald smirked once more. Oh, nothing in particular. Just don't come to school on election day. That's all I want. And if I were to refuse? With a wave of Ronald's hand, his entourage circled around Ren. They were all well built, their menacing gazes like daggers carving into her. Unfortunately, I don't think that refusing is really on the table, if you really wanted to. Then, well, I think we just have to make you stay home. As if to drive the point home, Ronald's friends all cracked their knuckles. My goodness, we're at school, aren't we? Is it really proper to do something like this? Ren spoke in an astonished manner, but Ronald took to her to be panicking and spoke pleasantly. Now, just who would be snooping around behind the schoolhouse? Even if something did so happen to see, I'm sure my father could use his connections to deal with them. Besides, I'm sure they'd much prefer to pretend they'd seen nothing. Everyone in the school knows how things stand. Except for you, apparently. Ren let out an instinctive sigh, seeing his obnoxious smirk. It seems this boy's in need of a little discipline, though I did promise Tita earlier that I wouldn't be too showy with it. Well, I suppose it's only my only choice now. Let's just think of this as an opportune moment. Oblivious to what Ren was truly thinking, Ronald continued his speech. Now, do as I say, Ren Bright. Ronald's friends began coming closer to Ren, ready to hold her down. I'll have to be careful not to go overboard, but I'll make sure you suffer just a tiny bit. If it'll get you to reflect on your actions, then I'm sure Estelle won't mind too much. It was just as Ren had determined her course of action that a voice called out. Stop it, please. It was a young woman's voice, calling from by the school building. Of course, the person they were yelling at wasn't Ren, but Ronald and his friends. Wait, aren't you? Ronald's frustration appeared once more. The girl had a twinge of fear in her voice, but she stood resolute regardless. I just happened to be passing by, but I heard a bit of your conversation. This is wrong. Please stop and reconsider. The girl stepped toward Ronald as she spoke, apparently to get between him and Ren. Stepping out from the shadows of the schoolhouse, her hair gleamed softly in the afternoon sunlight. Ren had seen this girl before. She was a first-year student who lived in the dorm next to hers. They would greet each other when passing in the hallway, but they weren't especially close. She seemed to be a quiet and reserved girl from a good family, so Ren was surprised by the strong will she displayed in trying to help her. Ronald was equally as surprised. Clearly, he thought Ren was the only student who dared to stand against them. Despite his shock, he looked to the blonde girl standing in his way up and down, giving a cruel smile. I see, so I'm wrong, am I? By your looks, you're what, a first year? Perhaps you're in need of a little lesson before Bright. Think a bit more carefully about what you think this society deems right and wrong. At Ronald's words, the thugs rushed to surround the blonde girl. The girl began slightly quaking in fear of the looming threat, but she stood her ground nonetheless. Knock it off at once, Ren demanded of them. I'll do what you want, so cease this immediately. Miss Bright? Perfect. The girl was surprised by Ren's concession, but Ronald gave a content smile. I won't come to school for a few days. Is that good enough? Miss Bright, please don't. Being an exchange student is tougher than I expected. It's been quite exhausting, so I could honestly use a break myself. Ren explained to the girl who'd come to help her, hoping to calm her down. Ronald, on the other hand, was ecstatic at his victory. So you finally learned your place, Ren Bright. Works for me. If you just behave yourself for a few days, my job will become much easier. I'll even overlook the little first year's transgressions. Saying as much, Ronald turned his entourage in high spirits. I'll see you around, Bright. By the next time we meet, the school will already belong to me. Leaving the pair with those words, Ronald and his gang departed. The two remained behind the school building, the younger girl looking over Ren with concern. I'm doing fine, though I appreciate your consideration. Saying as much, Ren gave the girl a kind smile. The following day, Ren Bright fell ill and began a hiatus from school. A few days later, the whole student body gathered in the auditorium. It was finally time for the RMS High School Student Council election. Given RMS's focus on student autonomy, the Student Council held a great deal of power. They were even in charge of organizing certain events, such as the academic festival that had just been held in the capital and happened each spring. While they wielded great power over many operations, they were in turn held responsible and evaluated for their performance. Such evaluations even had value after graduation. It was for this reason that many students ran with high hopes for the prestigious position. That's what made this year such an anomaly. For some reason, rival candidates had dropped out one by one until only Roland and his clique remained. Does it not look good if I win by a vote of confidence? Ronald and his friends chuckled quietly as they awaited the results. The other candidates didn't even attempt to campaign. It was safe to say that Ronald's victory was already secured. It was time for Ronald's campaign speech. He stood in a tall, gentlemanly manner, affecting his voice with the same proud style of speech that his father would use. The actual content was thought out and well written on top of that. It was all around a solid performance. Every now and then a boast would slip out, but that was a little concern given that his opponents didn't even have proper speeches. Well then everyone, please have a look at the screen. A few years prior, a large screen had been installed behind the podium Ronald was using. It was often used for lectures or even for the occasional recreation movie screening. One could argue that the reason the school even had such a screen was because of Calvert's development of warble films. In past years, candidates had used the screen to provide visual aid to their speeches, displaying relevant pictures. This year, however, Ronald intended to take things a step further. Utilizing the screen, he displayed a promotional video. It wasn't one that seemed like it could be made by some independent student, but instead one that seemed to be made by some large film company. It must have costed a great deal of mira. Having been professionally made, it was nearly perfect. The election had practically already been won before Ronald even stepped on stage. With this video, there could no longer be any doubt. Oh, I know what's gonna happen here. Ren's gonna mess with it. Even if she's not there, she'll still mess with it. The video is worthy of the elite trajectory Ronald envisioned for himself. Believing as much with all his heart, Ronald pressed play. Oh god. In before the embarrassment, the video began with heart-pounding opening music, after which Ronald's visage appeared on screen and began speaking. So how much do you want? Come on, lend me your support and you can get all the mirror you want. Huh? However, the video being projected was completely different from the one Ronald had prepared. Instead, it was a recording of himself, just a few days prior, paying off a rival candidate. With Ronald shocked into inaction, the video advanced to the next scene. Now, if you don't want something bad to happen, just drop out of the election, won't you? Or would you prefer a hospital bed to your dorm bed? Once again, he was shocked to see himself on screen, this time from when he'd threatened an opponent with violence. By now, Ronald understood what had happened. Somebody had replaced the film he had prepared. To nobody's surprise, there was an uproar among the students. Ronald scrambled around shouting, trying to cover it up. No, this was complete nonsense. Clearly there's something wrong. Somebody's trying to slander me. As if waiting for those exact words, a girl's voice echoed from the auditorium's entrance. It's rather unfortunate, but what you see before you is the absolute truth. The voice was just as clear and confident as it was enchanting. A girl with flowing violet hair slowly advanced from the entrance towards the podium, speaking as she approached. Bribing voters, threatening violence against their opponents, and finally bullying and attempting to injure other students. Ronald Griffith, your sins are laid bare. Before he knew it, the girl had come up to the podium and now stood face to face with him. All the students' eyes were glued to the scene, as if Ren was the dignified main protagonist finally making her entrance on stage. Ren Bright, why won't you stop getting in my way? Ronald let out a cry of muffled rage. Renne, on the other hand, making her debut into the school followed many days of absence, responded with grace. If anyone's getting in anyone else's way, I believe that would be you, Ronald. You've shamelessly disgraced this momentous election with countless acts of misconduct. Saying this, Ren turned not to Ronald but to the students, gesturing for them to all watch his crimes unfold on screen. Sometimes the students would frown, at other points they'd put on a sympathetic expression. At some scenes they'd go completely silent. In the end, they were all left with one collective emotion. Rage. All of it directed at Ronald. We've only been classmates for a short while, but it still pains me to say this to a fellow student. Yet, regardless of my own feelings, it must be said. Ronald Griffith, you are not fit to be student council. No, beyond that, you are not fit to have any place in the honorable and prestigious history of our great Aramis High School. Oh, savage. Ren's speech was but the first in a barrage of anger and blame towards Ronald. Hell yeah. Stop smearing the good name of our school. We'll never forgive a guy like you. It wasn't just thanks to Ren's accusations, none of the students were oblivious to how Ronald conducted himself every day. Out of fear for his father's authority and connections, no one had been able to put a stop to him. Finally, all of that pent-up anger spilled forth. During a hail of jeers, Ronald looked over to his entourage for help, yet none of them would meet his gaze. In that moment, it struck Ronald that the castle he had spent so long building for himself was made of sand. With his eyes filled with hatred and his heart filled with despair, Ronald rushed away from the podium. Everyone cheered at the sight of him fleeing, flustered and afraid, out of the auditorium. It wasn't until that evening that Ren had been staying late to help deal with the mess caused by all the election day turmoil, finally left the school grounds. She walked part of the way back to her dormitory, but then took a detour down an unfamiliar road where she arrived at a quiet park. I assume here's fine. There's no one to get in our way, so you can come out. At Ren's words, Ronald, who Ren hadn't seen since his escape from earlier that afternoon, appeared without a dozen men backing him up. The men were the same entourage of students that had always followed Ronald around at school. These men all wore gaudy clothes and had vicious expressions. They clearly weren't in any polite line of work. Most likely, they were some sort of low-tiered organized group. Well, Griffith, you have quite a few shady friends, don't you? I suppose it's time to begin the party. Today's the last time you'll ever look at me with that damn smug expression, Ren Bright. My aspirations to become an elite politician, my bright future, you've taken it all away from me. What the hell am I supposed to say to my father? I don't really know, Griffith. Wouldn't it be best if you cleaned up your own act before going to him? Hearing Ren's unshaken tone, Ronald's entire body shook with rage as he shouted. I'll never forgive you, you hear me? I'm tired of keeping up appearances. You stupid bitch, I don't care what happens to you. I can clean it up all later. Do whatever the hell you want to her. At Ronald's command, the men all started rushing in, but just a few moments later, they couldn't believe their own eyes. Ronald couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Surely he'd seen it, but his brain just couldn't process it. The moment he'd issued his command, the petite girl in front of him suddenly brought out a massive golden scythe, seemingly from nowhere. As if that wasn't strange enough, what followed after made it feel as if he'd been dreaming. It was like a cat toying with a mouse that couldn't escape, except the cat was a small girl with a scythe, the mice, a dozen grown men that were left scattered around. At first, the men were confident as they moved in to surround her, but they quickly came to realize the insurmountable difference in ability when, in a single motion, Ren's scythe cut down half of their friends in less than 10 seconds flat. It could hardly even be considered a fight. The rats scrambled and ran in fear as the kitten chased them around with joy. At times, she'd pretend to let them escape, allowing them a brief moment of relief, before crushing it all underfoot by instantly catching up once more. They'd repeat this process over and over until the mouse would get too exhausted to keep running, and join the others fainted on the ground. One by one, the men fell until it was only Ren and Ronald left standing. What the? What did you? How did you? This isn't real. Ronald couldn't accept the reality before his own eyes. Ren, like a child who still wanted to play more slowly approached them. Those men were still too inexperienced. They were no fun to play with at all. Please, stay calm. I haven't slaughtered them all quite yet. Ren looked away from the men, directing our attention to Ronald. Oh, moments before death. God, Ren looks so cool here. Now then, Griffith, why don't we play together for a bit? Her words sent chills down Ronald's spine. In his eyes, Ren had become nothing more than a horrific monster wearing a girl's skin. Don't get anywhere near me. Daddy's a congressman, you know. If you do anything to me, don't think he'll ever forgive you. Hearing this, Ren looked down at Ronald with pity in her eyes and tossed him a magazine. Here, why don't you read today's gossip column? Huh? Ronald had no clue what she meant, but the moment he looked at the front cover of the magazine, he turned deathly pale. The headline, Congressman Griffith involved in massive bribery scandal, possible connections to criminal organizations, adorned the front cover in bold letters. They put together a special report, gathering all matters of evidence. It would seem the CID has already decided on the results of their investigation. I wonder, will he still be in Congress by the end of the day tomorrow? My condolences. Ronald was so shocked that he couldn't even form words anymore, but Ren held no intention to just let him off now. Oh, that's such a good shot of Ren. I love it. But let's not go on and on about your father. How about we have some fun together, just the two of us? Holding her scythe to the side, Ren approached Ronald with a sadistic grin. He tried to flee, but ended up tripping on a small stone and falling over. As if beholding the slow but inevitable approach of the Grim Reaper, Ronald looked up at Ren with tears flowing from his eyes and snot running from his nose. Please, engrave this memory into your soul. This is what happens when you mess with Ren. Ren raised the scythe above her head, ready to swing it down. Following the moment when Ronald's life flashed before his eyes, he was shocked at what he heard. My, that just won't do. It seems I let my old habit of mine slip out. Ren covered her mouth with one hand, blushing ever so slightly. It seemed that in her excitement she had begun acting as she did when she was a child. This wasn't befitting of a young lady. At the time Ren had calmed herself down, Ronald had already passed out. Seems we're finished here. As she left the park, she heard the voice of a calm young man calling out to her. Yeah, more or less. Ren looked over to where the response had come from. Leaning against the tree was a tan young man, standing quietly. He seemed to have been watching everything in the park unfold. Hi? The man glanced at the park, clearly impressed. Nice work. Oh? Which one? Both, of course. Your combat proficiency as the Angel of Slaughter and your hacking skills as Kitty. They're both pretty impressive. Not to mention that it's crazy how easily you were able to uncover the wrongdoings of a big-name congressman like that. However, Ren didn't boast over her own talents. That's just because the Orbital network is still so insecure. Perhaps that can't be helped since it's just now beginning to experience popular use, but governments and mega corporations really should be more careful. You make it sound like you have experience with their security. I wonder. Ren faced back towards the young man with a smile. Though I must say, I'm impressed with you. You managed to pin down the perfect evidence and then write such a tremendous article in such a short time. I'm pleased that Miss Lin decided to introduce us. Lin? Well, I'm a pro reporter, aren't I? That's just my job. This young man's name was Dingo Brad, as he worked as a writer for a gossip magazine. He was a talented journalist who was willing to get mixed in with all sorts of dangerous situations in order to find a good scoop. On top of that, his information network was top-notch. Meeting through their mutual friend, Grace. Oh, Ren and Dingo had struck a deal a few days earlier. He'd worked to collect evidence on Ronald's crimes at school, while Ren had put her hacking talents to use collecting evidence on his father's crimes as a politician. Thanks to the excellent results of their partners' snooping, both parties were able to achieve the outcome they were looking for. Did get help from some friends though. They all whined like, "Buh, it's such a pain to dig up dirt on some congressman's lazy son, buh." But in the end, the info they grabbed paid off. Oh, I suppose it's to be expected of a journalist to have so many friends to call on. Finally, it explained the feeling she had that someone was moving in the shadows besides Dingo, while Ren had been resting. Thinking about her hunch, she continued the conversation. At any rate, it seems that you managed to get the article into the magazine without any interference. Well, Congressman Griffin ain't exactly the current administrator's favorite dude. They probably let me put the story out since it doesn't get in the way of the president's faction, and it makes the CID look like they're doing something good for once. I see. If that old Tita user is in charge of the case, then everything should be fine. Well, I suppose. I'm a bit discontent with the fact that she was probably using me indirectly. If that old Tita user is in charge of the case, then everything should be fine. Wow, okay. After this, Dingo raised the question. Gotta say, little miss, I'm still a bit stumped by what exactly you wanted out of this whole thing. Were you really that interested in that boy? They both cast a sidelong glance at Roland, still lying unconscious in the park. Ren, however, simply shrugged. No, not really. In truth, I hadn't intended for things to come this far. I was just going to teach him a little lesson without getting directly involved, but at that moment, Ren remembered the younger girl who'd run to her aid. If that boy had become student council president, it would have been terrible for my cute little underclassman. He said as much with a refined smile. Just as Ren had predicted, Congressman Griffith resigned on suspicions of fraud. Ronald, likewise, dropped out of Armis of his own accord. His faction that had once done as they pleased throughout the school naturally dissipated, and Armis High School was at peace once more. However, one thing didn't go quite as Ren had expected. President, here's the paperwork for next month's budget. A young blonde-haired girl, the new General Affairs Manager, handed a stack of papers over to the newly elected student body president of Armis High School. Ren Bright, she skimmed over the documents. On the day of the election, most of the candidates dropped out following Ronald's flight from the auditorium. Regardless, the vote was held, but over 70% of the votes were deemed invalid. That was because each one of them had written in the name of a candidate who wasn't even in the running. The school tried to avoid interfering with student affairs due to their academic philosophy of student freedom, but now they feared a massive outcry of displeasure given their failure to deal with Roland. The teachers, searching for a way to appease the student body, swiftly moved to hold negotiations with Ren. With all of their urging, she ultimately had no choice but to accept the role. The student council work was easy enough for Ren to manage, though it was a big departure from her initial plans of remaining graceful yet humble, and avoiding standing out. Well, there's nothing I can do to help it. I heard from Tita that I had somehow ended up as a student council president at Thor's Branch campus. I wonder if he felt the same. What's done is done. I might as well put this position to good use. Nice photo. Warm sunlight filtered into the student council room as the blonde-haired girl and her two friends struggled to figure out all sorts of unfamiliar tasks. Ren sat there, listening to their occasional complaints and friendly small talk, thinking to herself. Constant innovations and fears in the world of technology, the future movement of the society, something brewing that would soon envelop the entire nation of Calvard. There's nothing shortage of worries to be had, but for now, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to just sit by and enjoy our school life. Well then everyone, let's wrap up today's work so quickly so we can go and enjoy some tea. The spring breeze had already passed, yet summer's warm days had not yet arrived either. It was a bright, ordinary afternoon. That girl's ordinary school life end. There's the second thread.